Usually a legal document is assumed to be carved in stone. You write the rules, you set them in the town square, and that is pretty much it.
Right, they're supposed to be permanent.
Exactly. But the Indian Constitution is actively designed to be this shapeshifter. Today, we are taking a deep dive specifically into Chapter 11, Part XX of the Indian Polity Syllabus. That's Article 368.
Yes, the amendment process. It is a fascinating piece of law.
It really is. We are going to figure out how a national constitution bends without breaking.
Yeah.
And look, if you are currently studying for the UPSC, the SSC, state PSCs, or honestly any major competitive exam, understanding the mechanics of this living document is an absolute high-yield cheat code.
Oh, it absolutely is a cheat code. Examiners for these competitive tests, they just love digging into Article 368.
I bet. It seems like it's everywhere in the mock exams.
Yeah, because it is not just rote memorization, It is the exact intersection where the raw mechanics of government meet, well, high-stakes political friction. If you understand the logic behind the rules, you don't even have to memorize them. They just naturally make sense.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Before we get into the actual mechanics of Article 368, looking at our source notes, it's clear the drafters of the Constitution were terrified of two global extremes.
Yes, they definitely had some negative role models, so to speak.
Right. They looked at the United States and the United Kingdom, and they saw exactly what they did not want to do. Think of a skyscraper.
Okay, I like this analogy.
If it's built too rigidly, it snaps in an earthquake. But if it's too flimsy, it just blows over in the wind. The Constitution needs to sway, but hold its ground.
That is a perfect way to visualize it. You see, the drafters were dealing with a newly independent, incredibly diverse nation. They needed stability, but they also desperately needed room to grow.
So what do they see when they looked at the U.S.?
When they looked at the United States, they saw an unyielding system. To amend the U.S. Constitution, you need a two-thirds supermajority in both houses of Congress just to propose a change.
Just to propose it. That's wild.
Exactly. And then, after all that, you need ratification by 3/4 of all the state legislatures.
Which mathematically is almost impossible to achieve in a highly polarized environment. It is like a completely rigid crystal structure.
Right. It doesn't bend at all.
Yeah, if the societal pressure gets too high, the structure doesn't adapt, it just shatters. Which I guess explains why the U.S. has only managed, barely 27 amendments in over 230 years?
Precisely. The Indian framers knew that level of rigidity would completely paralyze a rapidly developing nation. But then on the flip side, they looked at the United Kingdom.
And the U.K. is the exact opposite, right?
Yes, the UK operates on the principle of parliamentary sovereignty. They do not even have a single codified constitution.
Wait, really? No single document?
No single document. Because of that, any constitutional change in the UK can be passed with just a simple majority. It is exactly like passing an ordinary law about, traffic rules or local tax rates.
Wow, that sounds incredibly volatile. I mean, if a populist government gets a temporary wave of overwhelming public support, they could theoretically rewrite the country's core values over a single weekend.
That was exactly the fear. The framers did not want the foundational rights of citizens subject to the whims of a temporary majority. So India chose a very deliberate middle path.
Goldilocks zone.
Exactly. A blend of rigidity to protect the core and flexibility to adapt to social and economic evolution.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Instead of just picking one middle ground rule and applying it to every single law, the Constitution actually scales the difficulty. The amendment process changes based on what is at stake.
Yes, the three-tier system is brilliant.
Right. Not all constitutional clauses are treated equally. So wait, you are telling me changing a state's physical border is actually mathematically easier than changing a fundamental right. Why is that?
Well, looking at the lowest barrier first, you have amendments by a simple majority. Like when a new state is created or a state legislative council is abolished, that only requires just a majority of the people in the room voting yes.
Just a standard vote. Over 50% of whoever showed up.
Correct. And the crucial exam detail to underline for you here is that amendments made by a simple majority are technically considered outside the scope of Article 368.
Wait, really? They are outside of it?
Yes, they function exactly like ordinary legislative bills. Article 368 doesn't even apply to them.
That makes perfect historical sense, though. At independence, the internal map of India was a completely chaotic patchwork of princely states and British provinces.
It was a geographical mess, yeah.
The framers knew they would have to redraw those internal lines constantly for administrative efficiency, making that a massive, mathematically difficult constitutional hurdle every single time would have paralyzed the country's development.
That is the exact historical logic. It was a practical necessity to keep the internal borders flexible. But what happens when Parliament wants to touch something deeply foundational?
Like the fundamental rights.
Exactly. Say, the fundamental rights of the citizens or the government's long-term goals, the directive principles of state policy. A simple majority simply won't cut it there.
Right, and that is where Article 368 officially kicks in with what the syllabus calls a special majority. The math here is very specific, and it's a dual condition.
Yes, dual condition is the key phrase.
You need a majority of the total membership of the House, meaning over 50% of the total seats, regardless of who is absent or abstaining. Plus, you need 2/3 of the members who are actually present and voting that day.
Let's visualize that math because students taking the UPSC constantly mix up those two conditions.
Yeah, let's break it down.
Imagine a house with 500 total seats. To meet the first condition, you absolutely must have at least 251 votes, no matter what.
Because that's the absolute majority of the total membership.
Exactly. But let's say it's a rainy Tuesday and only 300 people actually show up to vote. 2/3 of 300 is 200.
Right, so 200 people vote yes.
Yes. But even though you met the 2/3 requirement of those present, you failed the absolute majority requirement of 251. So the bill dies.
Oh, wow, so you have to clear both hurdles independently. That forces a massive, undeniable consensus across party lines. You can't just sneak a vote through on a Friday afternoon when the opposition benches are empty.
You really can't. It protects the core rights of the citizens from those temporary legislative whims we talked about. But the Constitution goes one step further. There's a third tier of difficulty.
The highest barrier.
The absolute highest. It is designed specifically to guard the federal core of the nation.
And based on the notes, the federal core basically includes the mechanics that balance power between the central government in New Delhi and the individual state governments.
Right, the federal structure itself.
So we're talking about the election of the president, the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court and the high courts, and the distribution of legislative powers between the center and states.
Correct. For those provisions, Parliament cannot act alone no matter how big their majority is. You need the special majority in both houses of Parliament, but then, and this is the kicker, the amendment must be sent out to all the state legislatures.
Oh, so the states actually get a veto.
Essentially, yes. It requires ratification by at least half of the state legislatures before it can become law.
Which we actually saw play out with the introduction of the goods and services tax, the GST, right?
Yes, a perfect real-world example.
Because it fundamentally altered how taxes were collected by both the center and the states, Parliament couldn't just mandate it from the top down. They had to get half the states to agree to the constitutional change.
Exactly. They needed state buy-in. And there is one more item in that highest tier that is an absolute favorite for exam setters.
Oh, what is it?
Article 368 itself.
That is brilliant design. You cannot change the rules of changing the rules without passing this highest barrier.
Right. The central government can't just vote to make amendments easier in the future to give themselves more power.
It creates a closed loop of protection. So we have the philosophy and the math down, but the floor procedure, how these bills actually move through the halls of Parliament, has its own set of rules that frequently trip up candidates, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. The timeline is fascinating because it differs so much from ordinary lawmaking.
So how does the ball actually get rolling?
First off, an amendment bill under Article 368 can be introduced in either the Lok Sabha or the Rajya Sabha. It doesn't matter which. But, and this is crucial, it can never originate in a state legislature.
Right. So states can ratify certain amendments, but they cannot initiate a change to the Constitution themselves.
Exactly. Furthermore, the bill can be introduced by a government minister or by a private member.
And just to clarify for everyone listening, because this confused me, at first, a private member in parliamentary terminology just means any member of parliament who is not a minister in the current government.
Yep, that is the exact definition.
It could be an MP from the opposition party or just a backbencher from the ruling party. They have the right to propose a constitutional change.
Yes, and here is a crucial exam detail. They do not need prior permission from the President of India to introduce the bill.
That is a major distinction, isn't it? Because for certain bills, like those altering state boundaries or money bills, you have to get the president's recommendation before you even bring it to the floor.
You do. But for an Article 368 amendment, you can just introduce it. No prior nod required.
Okay, but what about the biggest procedural trap? The one that shows up on mock tests all the time.
Ah, you were talking about deadlocks between the two houses.
Yes. The joint sitting rule. Like, if the Lok Sabha passes an ordinary bill and the Rajya Sabha rejects it, The president can summon a joint sitting of both houses to vote on it together and resolve the deadlock.
That is how ordinary bills work, yes.
But for a constitutional amendment under Article 368, a joint sitting is strictly forbidden.
Strictly forbidden, and we really need to look at the mathematical logic behind why that is. Think about the composition of Parliament.
Well, the Lok Sabha is based on population, so it has vastly more members, over 540?
Around there, yes.
And the Rajya Sabha represents the states and only has around 245 members. So if you allowed a joint sitting, the sheer numerical advantage of the Lok Sabha would instantly neutralize the Rajya Sabha.
Exactly. The lower house could effectively steamroll the upper house every single time there was a disagreement.
It is like two parents who have to independently agree on a major new rule for the house. You can't just lock them in a room together to force a compromise. If they don't both agree separately, the rule doesn't pass.
That is a great analogy. By forbidding a joint sitting, the Constitution guarantees that the Rajya Sabha maintains an absolute equal veto power over any changes to the Constitution.
It is an intentional mathematical roadblock.
It is. It forces true consensus instead of just letting the bigger house force its will. Both houses must pass the bill separately with their own special majorities.
Okay, so Parliament navigates all of this. Both houses pass the bill separately. If it touches federal issues, half the states ratify it. The final step is that the bill lands on the desk of the President of India.
Right, the final signature.
Historically, could the president just veto a constitutional amendment?
Right.
Like just say no?
Well, this is where the mechanics of Article 368 violently collide with massive political history. In the early decades of the Republic, there was a lot of ambiguity.
Ambiguity in the Constitution.
Yeah, the text didn't explicitly restrict the president's options regarding amendment bills, and this ambiguity was at the center of an incredible political showdown between Parliament and the judiciary.
Our sources highlight the 24th Amendment Act of 1971 as a massive turning point here. To understand why it happened, we have to look at the friction of that era.
We do. In the late 60s and early 70s, Parliament was trying to pass major socialist reforms like aggressive land redistribution and abolishing the privy purses of former royals.
But the courts kept striking these moves down.
Constantly. The courts argued these laws violated the fundamental right to property as it existed back then.
So Parliament felt the judiciary was acting as a roadblock to social progress.
They absolutely felt that way. Parliament wanted supreme, unquestionable power to amend any part of the Constitution, including those fundamental rights, without interference from the courts or the president.
So in 1971, Parliament passed the 24th Amendment.
And the 24th Amendment fundamentally changed the rules of the game. It explicitly stated that Parliament has the power to amend any provision of the Constitution.
Any provision at all.
Yes. And more importantly for our discussion, it made it categorically obligatory for the president to give their assent to a constitutional amendment bill.
Obligatory. So once an amendment passes the houses, the president cannot withhold assent.
They cannot. They cannot return it for reconsideration. They are legally forced to sign it.
Wow. Which concentrated an enormous amount of power in the hands of Parliament. I mean, critics immediately saw the terrifying potential here, right?
Oh, absolutely. The argument was that the amendment process in India already looked far too much like ordinary lawmaking.
Right. There is no separate constituent assembly called to debate these changes.
Yeah.
It's the exact same politicians who pass everyday tax laws.
Exactly. It raised an existential question for the Republic. If a single political party somehow captured a supermajority in both houses and the president was legally forced to sign whatever they passed, what was stopping that party from legally dismantling democracy itself?
I mean, if they have the math, they could theoretically pass an amendment that says elections are permanently suspended. We are now a dictatorship.
It sounds extreme, but strictly legally speaking, under the 24th Amendment, Parliament technically had the power to do it.
And that profound fear is what forced the Supreme Court to pull the emergency brake.
Yes, the big one.
2 years after the 24th Amendment, we get the Kesavananda Bharati case of 1973. If you remember one single case for your exams, it is this one. It is the absolute bedrock of modern Indian constitutional law.
It really is.
Yes.
The Supreme Court had to find a way out of this trap. They couldn't just ignore the 24th Amendment. It was passed legally, but they couldn't allow Parliament to have limitless power to destroy the system either.
So what did they do?
They essentially said to Parliament, Yes, we acknowledge you have incredibly wide powers under Article 368. You can amend any part of the Constitution, including the fundamental rights.
Done.
But they added one massive historic caveat. They ruled that while Parliament can amend the Constitution, they do not have the power to alter or destroy its basic structure.
The Basic Structure Doctrine. It's essentially a software analogy.
Oh, how so?
Think of it like a computer. Parliament has the admin rights to update the apps, change the user interface, and fix bugs in the system. But the Supreme Court ruled in Kesavananda Bharati that Parliament cannot rewrite the underlying operating system. The core code is permanently locked.
That is an excellent way to frame it for the listeners. Parliament can tweak the laws to fit modern socioeconomic needs, but features like democracy, secularism, the rule of law, the separation of powers, and judicial review, these are the operating system.
They are the basic structure.
Yes, no amendment, regardless of how massive the majority is, can touch them.
So the 24th Amendment in 1971 affirmed Parliament's immense power to bend the Constitution, but Kesavananda Bharati in 1973 drew the absolute outer limit so it wouldn't break.
That tension, that ongoing friction between Parliament trying to exercise its mandate and the judiciary protecting the core is exactly what has kept the Indian Constitution alive.
It's an incredible balancing act. I mean, we have seen over 100 amendments now. The Constitution has adapted to new technologies, it has reorganized complex internal borders, and it has massively expanded educational and social rights.
It survived because it could adapt.
Exactly. But it endured because the judiciary locked down the core.
And that is exactly what you need to understand for the assertion reasoning questions on your exams. You aren't just memorizing rules. You are tracking a dynamic system of checks and balances.
Let's tie this whole narrative together for your notes then. Rapid fire recap.
Let's do it.
We started with the philosophy. Article 368 avoids the unyielding rigidity of the U.S. model and the volatile flexibility of the U.K. model. It utilizes escalating stakes. Simple majorities are used for internal borders, keeping the process flexible for national integration.
Right, and then special majorities step in to protect major rights, requiring both absolute numbers and supermajorities in the room.
And for the federal core, we bring in the state legislatures to ensure the central government can't consolidate power unilaterally.
Then you have the procedural safeguards on the floor of Parliament. No state initiation. No joint sittings, which mathematically guarantees the Rajya Sabha's veto power.
And finally, the climax of the amendment story. Parliament secures its power by removing the presidential veto with the 24th Amendment. But the Supreme Court creates the ultimate fail-safe with the 1973 Basic Structure Doctrine, ensuring the operating system of the country remains untouched.
If you can internalize that specific political logic, the why and the how behind the rules, the facts will naturally stick in your head when you sit down for your UPSC or state PSC exam. You will not have to guess.
You have the tools now to navigate the trickiest parts of Chapter 11. But before you go back to your highlighters and practice tests, there's a final thought we want to leave you with. It builds on everything we've unpacked today about the balance of power.
I love a good hypothetical.
Look, if the basic structure is the ultimate shield against Parliament destroying the Constitution, but the Constitution itself never actually defines what the basic structure is anywhere in its text, who holds the real power to decide where the bending stops and the breaking begins?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Something for you to ponder. Until next time, keep digging deep.